At this time of year, and this time of day, there were very few people in the park. It was probable that the young lady, who was sitting on one of the benches, had just wanted to rest for a while and think about the coming spring. She sat there, thoughtful and still. The sadness in her eyes seemed to be something new, because it had not yet changed her bright young face, nor turned her soft lips into a thin, hard line. A tall young man came walking through the park along the path near the bench where she was sitting. Behind him came a boy carrying a suitcase. When the man saw the young lady, his face changed to red and back to pale again. He watched her face as he came closer, and his own face showed both hope and worry at the same time. He passed her only a few meters away, but she gave no sign that she had seen him or even knew he was there. 50 meters further on, the young man suddenly stopped and sat down on a bench by the path. The boy dropped the suitcase and stared at him with wondering eyes. The young man took out his handkerchief and wiped his face. It was a good handkerchief, a good face, and the young man was good to look at. He said to the boy, "I want you to take a message to that young lady on that bench. Tell her I am on my way to the station to leave for San Francisco. From there I shall travel north to the wild places of Alaska. Tell her that, as she has ordered me neither to speak nor to write to her. I am taking this chance to appeal to her one last time. Tell her that she has been unkind and unjust to someone who has done no wrong, and she has given him no reasons and no explanations. Tell her that I do not believe her to be an unjust person. Tell her that I have disobeyed her orders in the hope that she will return to the paths of justice and reason. Go and tell her that." The young man dropped a $50 into the boy's hand. The boy looked at him for a moment with bright, intelligent eyes out of a dirty face, then turned and ran down the path. As he came closer to the lady on the bench, he studied her carefully. The lady looked back at him coolly. "Lady," the boy said, "that guy on the other bench sent yer a song and dance by me. If yer don't know the guy, and he's trying to do some funny business, say the word, and I'll call a cop in 3 minutes. If yer does know him, and he's all right, then I'll give yer the song and dance that he gave me." The young lady showed a little, just a little interest. "A song and dance," she said in a very sweet voice that seemed to suggest something not at all sweet. "A new idea. A kind of traveling singer, I suppose? I used to know the gentleman who sent you, so it will not be necessary to call the police. Please begin your song and dance, but do not sing too loudly. It is not really the time or the place for that kind of thing." "Aw, come on, lady," said the boy. "You know what I mean. It ain't a song and dance, really. It's a lot of hot air. He told me to tell you he's got his shirts in that case, and he's moving on to Frisco. Then he's going on up to Alaska. He says you told him not to send round no more love notes, nor stand around looking over the garden gate. He says you threw him out like last year's hat, and never gave him no chance to argue. He says you told him to go, and never said why." The interest in the young lady's eyes did not go away. Perhaps her interest was in the cleverness of the future Alaskan traveler, who had found a way to get round her orders. She fixed her eyes on an untidy-looking tree in the park and spoke to the messenger. Tell the gentleman that he knows very well what my ideals are. He knows what they have been, and he knows what they still are. In this matter, the two most important ideals are that a person should be true and loyal. Tell him that I have studied my own heart, and I know that it can be weak as well as strong. That is why I do not wish to listen to his arguments or to hear any words from him at all. I am not unjust, and have never been unjust. But if he really wants to hear what he already knows, you may tell him this. Tell him I entered the garden room that evening from the door at the back to cut a flower for my mother. Tell him I saw him and Miss Ashburton beneath the pink oleander bush. It was a pretty picture indeed, but the juxtaposition told the whole story without the need for a single word. I left the garden room at once without the flower, and with my ideals broken into 100,000 pieces. You may take that song and dance to your dancing teacher. Juxta? Help me out, lady, said the boy. Give me an easier word, will you? Juxtaposition. Or if you like, closeness. The kind of closeness that can destroy an ideal in a second. At once the boy turned and ran back to the other bench. The young man's eyes questioned him hungrily. The boy's eyes shone with excitement at his new job as translator. The lady says that she knows that girls just can't stop listening when a guy comes telling stories and trying to be real nice and friendly. That's why she won't listen to no sweet words from yer. She says she caught yer in the hothouse under the flowers with your arms around a girl. She just stepped in the back to get a flower for her ma, and yer was holding this other girl real nice and close. She says it looked pretty, all right, but it made her sick. She says you're gotta get busy and get off and get that train real quick. The young man's eyes opened wide, and his eyes lit up with a sudden thought. His hand flew to the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a handful of letters. Choosing one, he gave it to the boy, together with a silver dollar from another pocket. Give that letter to the lady, he said, and ask her to read it. Tell her that it should explain everything. Tell her that she needs another ideal. She must learn to trust, and that trust can prevent much unnecessary heartache. Tell her that her ideals are not broken. Tell her that the true and loyal person is still true and loyal, and has not changed in any way. Tell her I am waiting for an answer. The messenger stood before the lady again. The guy says there's been bad things said about him, and it ain't right. It ain't just. He says he ain't a bad guy. And lady, you read that letter, and you're going to see that he's all right. All right. The young lady took the letter. She seemed unsure about it, but she opened it and read it. Dear Dr. Arnold, I want to thank you for the very kind help that you gave to my daughter last Friday evening when she became suddenly ill with her old heart trouble in the garden room at Mrs. Waldron's party. It was so lucky that you were near enough to catch her as she fell and were able to give her a doctor's care at once. We are sure that you saved her life. I would be happy if you would visit us soon as her doctor. Gratefully yours, Robert Ashburton. The young lady closed the letter and gave it back to the boy. The guy wants an answer, said the messenger. What's the word, lady? The lady's eyes were suddenly very bright and smiling, "Tell that guy on the other bench," she said with a happy, shaky little laugh, "that his girl wants him."
It was the month of June, and the weather was beautiful. Stuart left school. He was on holiday, but he was not happy. He did not have a motorbike. Stuart was 17 years old. He left school, but he did not start work. All his mates started work immediately, but Stuart did not want to work. He wanted a long holiday, and he needed a motorbike. Stuart lived in Leeds, a big city in the north of England. Leeds is a busy city, full of offices, shops and factories. It's not a good place for a holiday. Martin, a friend of Stuart's, worked in a garage. Martin had a bike for sale. It was a beauty, a Japanese Suzuki. Martin wanted £350 for the bike, but Stuart did not have £350. He didn't have any money. Stuart went and looked at the bike every day. It was a beauty. He wanted to buy it. "Where can I find £350? Stuart asked himself. Stuart left the garage and walked back home. His house was in Blenheim Street, near the university. There were lots of old, empty houses in Blenheim Street. The university was one of the biggest in England. The university often bought land and buildings. Most of the old houses in Blenheim Street belonged to the university. Some of these houses had been empty for years. Stuart often searched through them. Sometimes he found old books and gramophone records. "One day," he told himself, "I'll find something valuable." There was a large house at the corner of Blenheim Street. Its owner, a rich old woman, had died a few days ago. The university bought the house immediately. Now the house was empty. There was wood across the front door, and the windows were broken. Someone looked out of a window. It was a man of about 20. He had long hair and was wearing a headband. He looked strange. He was a squatter. Squatters live in old, empty houses, and they don't pay any rent. The stranger waved to Stuart. He wanted to speak to Stuart. What does he want? Stuart asked himself. "Hi." "Hello." "Like to help me?" "Okay." "Watch this house." "How long?" "Half an hour." "Okay. I'm Stuart." "My name's Frank." "I'll go and get my things." "Are you going to squat here, Frank?" "Yes. Don't let anyone else in." "I'll be back soon." "Okay. See you." Frank walked off slowly down the street. His head was bent forward, and he was looking down at the pavement. He was about 20, but he looked much older. Frank went round the corner, and Stuart turned towards the house. It looked interesting. The window was low, quite near the ground. The street was empty. Stuart put one leg over the windowsill and looked inside. Outside, the sun was shining brightly. Inside the house, it was dark. Stuart stood for a few moments and waited. Slowly, the inside of the room became clearer. There was a calendar on the wall. Lots of old newspapers were lying around on the floor. There was a mattress against the far wall, It looked new. Stuart looked up and down the street. There was no one around. He quickly climbed into the room. Stuart walked to the middle of the room and kicked away the old newspapers. There was nothing underneath them. There was no carpet, and the floorboards were covered with dirt. Stuart took the calendar down from the wall. It was an old one, 5 years old. No one had changed it for 5 years. Then Stuart remembered. The owner of the house, the old woman, had been ill for a long time. She hadn't got out of her bed for 5 years. The mattress was leaning against the far wall. Stuart went over and looked at it carefully. It was a good mattress. Stuart picked up the mattress and turned it over carefully. There was some stitching along one side, about 10 centimeters long. Stuart held the mattress between his knees and took out a small knife. Stuart cut the stitches carefully and then put his hand in the hole. He felt a bundle of newspapers and pulled it out. He quickly unwrapped it. Inside the bundle of newspapers, there were some banknotes. Suddenly, Stuart heard a voice. It was Frank.
"Hey! Stuart! Where are you?"
Frank was shouting. Stuart quickly wrapped up the money inside the newspapers. He held the bundle behind his back.
"I'm in here, Frank!"
he shouted. Frank came up to the window and looked into the room.
"What are you doing in there?"
Frank asked.
"Nothing," replied Stuart. "I'm looking around."
Frank climbed into the room and came closer to Stuart. Stuart moved to the wall. He held the bundle of newspapers behind his back. Frank looked round the room. He didn't see Stuart's knife on the floor.
"You haven't taken anything, have you?"
asked Frank.
"I haven't taken anything of yours," replied Stuart.
"You've moved this mattress," said Frank. Frank picked up the mattress and turned it over carefully. Then he saw the hole in the side.
"You cut this mattress? It was stitched. Is this your knife?" "Yes." "What were you doing?" "Nothing."
"You found something."
"I didn't." "What's that in your hand?"
"Where?"
"Behind your back." "Nothing."
"You got something."
"Some old newspapers."
"Hand them over."
"They're mine."
Stuart remembered the motorbike. He needed the money. He was going to keep it. It was his money, not Frank's. Frank was holding Stuart's knife in his hand. He came nearer to Stuart.
"Give me those newspapers,"
he said again. Stuart had an idea.
"There's something else in the mattress," he said to Frank. "There was something under the newspapers. It's still there."
Frank looked at Stuart for a few moments. He didn't believe him at first.
"Look and see," said Stuart.
Frank put the knife down on the floor. He picked up the mattress and put his hand deep in the hole. Stuart did not wait for a moment. He turned and jumped out through the window into the street. He ran quickly. There was a turning on the right. Stuart ran round the corner. He heard a shout behind him. It was Frank. Round the corner, there was another old empty house. It had a large garden on one side. Thick bushes had grown all over the garden. Stuart jumped over the low wall. He ran for a few meters and then hid under some bushes. Stuart heard more shouting and footsteps. The footsteps became louder, then they stopped. Stuart waited silently. He did not breathe. Then the footsteps started once again. Stuart laughed quietly to himself. Frank had quickly picked up Stuart's knife. He jumped out of the window after him. Frank saw Stuart. He was running round the corner. Frank ran after him and turned the corner, but the street was empty. Frank stopped for a few moments and looked around. He noticed the old garden. "Perhaps he's in there," thought Frank. But everything in the garden was quiet. Frank saw nothing. There was another corner farther down the street. Frank started running again. He was still holding Stuart's knife. Stuart was happy. He had escaped from Frank with the money. Stuart sat up under the bushes and opened out the newspapers. The banknotes were wrapped tightly together. Stuart unwrapped them and counted them carefully. 10, 20, 30, 320, 325. Stuart had found £325, and Martin wanted £350 for his motorbike. It was cool in the garden, and Stuart lay back under the bushes. "I'll wait here for half an hour," thought Stuart. "Then I'll go to Martin." It was now nearly 12 o'clock. The day was getting much hotter. A police car was parked in a side street. There were 2 policemen in the car. The sergeant, a fat, round-faced man, was half asleep. The other policeman was younger and taller. He was a constable. Suddenly, the constable sat up. He had seen something strange. "Wake up, Sergeant!" he shouted. "Look over there!" "Where? What?" asked the sergeant, still half asleep. "Over there! Someone's running with a knife," replied the constable. "The man's gone mad. It's this heat." "Quick, get out and catch him," said the sergeant. The 2 policemen jumped out of their car. Frank saw the policeman. He threw Stuart's knife away and started to run. The constable soon caught him and held his arm tightly. The sergeant found the knife in some long grass. The constable took Frank towards the police car. The sergeant came up to them. He was holding the knife. "Oh, it's you," the sergeant said to Frank. "What's going on, Frank?" "I'm looking for a guy." "With a knife?" "What guy?" "He's stolen my money." "What money?" "How much money?" "I don't know. A lot." "You don't know?" "Where did you get it?" "In an old house." "Come on, into the car." "Where are you taking me?" asked Frank. "To the police station," replied the constable. "But I haven't done anything. The money was mine. That guy took it. What's his name? Stuart. Stuart took it." "Who's Stuart?" asked the constable. "I met him in an old house," replied Frank. "Where you found the money?" asked the sergeant. "Yes, I found it inside a mattress," said Frank. "Who's got the money now?" asked the sergeant. "That guy, Stuart. He ran away with it." "So, now we have to find Stuart," said the constable. Stuart waited in the garden for half an hour. It was getting hotter. It was nearly 12 o'clock. "I'll have to move now," thought Stuart. "Martin goes for his lunch at 12:30. Stuart looked out carefully from the bushes. The garden was empty. He hurried out of the garden onto the street. He walked towards Martin's garage. Stuart did not see the police car. It stopped outside the garden a few moments later. "Look in this garden," Frank told the policeman. "Perhaps he's hiding in here." "Hi, Martin." "Hello, Stuart." "How much for the bike?" £350. "I want it." "How much for me?" "Still £350. "Have you any money?" "Yes." "How much?" £300. No, that's not enough. 325? Okay, she's yours. Great, thanks. The policeman got out of the car. Frank got out too. The constable held his arm tightly. The sergeant went into the garden. He looked around for some time. Then he came back. He was holding a bundle of newspapers. "There's no one there," the sergeant said, "but I found these old newspapers." "That's them!" shouted Frank. "Something was wrapped in those newspapers." Just then a motorbike drove up towards the police car. "That's him!" shouted Frank excitedly. "That's the guy! He's bought a motorbike with my money." "Stop!" the sergeant called to Stuart. "Stop!" Stuart did not see Frank. "What do the police want?" Stuart asked himself. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm driving correctly." Stuart stopped the bike by the side of the road. He took off his helmet. "Is that bike yours?" the sergeant asked him. "Yes, it's mine," replied Stuart. "I bought it at the garage down the road." Then Stuart saw Frank. "What have you told these cops?" Stuart shouted angrily at Frank. "We'll all go to this garage," said the sergeant. They all walked back to Martin's garage. A big, black cloud now covered the sun. It was beginning to rain. "So, this lad paid you £325 for this bike," the sergeant said to Martin. Martin agreed. "And where did you get this money?" the sergeant asked Stuart. "I found it," replied Stuart. "I found it in a mattress. It was in an empty house." The sergeant took the money from Martin. "We'll look after this money," he said. "You two can go now." "It's my money!" shouted Frank. "Do you want to come to the police station with us?" asked the constable. Frank walked away, still shouting. "I'm sorry," Martin said to Stuart. "It's my bike again." "Not for long," replied Stuart. "What do you mean?" asked the sergeant. "It has started to rain now," replied Stuart. "I don't want a holiday. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to save another £325 and buy that bike."
Chapter 12. A Terrible Secret. Told to Rosa by Clara. "It happened that Sunday evening," said Clara. "It was the evening before Anita went away. I cooked some fish and rice for myself and Raphael. Soon it was ready, but Raphael was out in his boat. He often went out soon after it was dark. That day he was out for more than an hour. Then I heard his boat come onto the beach near our house. As you know, the house stands alone at the end of the village. But still Raphael didn't come to the house, and the food was getting cold and dry. So I took the small oil lamp from my kitchen, and I went down to the sea to find him. The boat was half on the sand and half in the water. Raphael was standing next to it. He was washing the inside of the boat. There was a lot of water in the bottom of it. I came near with the small lamp. The light shone on Raphael and the boat. He was very wet, his head and hair, his clothes. The water was running down him. Then I saw something terrible. There was blood on Raphael's clothes, blood in his hair, blood running down his face. His wet shirt and trousers were covered in it. There was fresh blood on his hands, red in the light of the lamp. "God save us," I said. "What's happened?" "I'm all right, Mother," he answered. "Don't be afraid. But I've killed the stranger who came here to steal my true love." Then I saw that all the water in the bottom of the boat was dark with blood. I put out the lamp immediately. There was no moon, and the night was dark. I looked round at the empty beach. "Take off those clothes," I said quietly. "Wash yourself in the sea until you're clean. Then go to the house and put on clean clothes. Go quickly to the cafe so people can see you. I'll wash your clothes and the boat. Nobody will know what you've done. If the soldier stops coming here, people won't be very surprised. The man was a stranger. He had no family or close friends." Raphael did what I told him. He went to the cafe and stayed there all that evening. While he was there, I washed the boat. Then I washed his shirt and trousers many times, until you couldn't see the blood. "Oh, Rose, my dear wife," said my uncle quietly, "have you kept this dark secret in your heart all these years since Clara died?" "I promised her. She asked me before she died," cried Rosa. "She was as mad as her son," said my uncle angrily. "We know the soldier ate with Rodrigo in his house that evening. Then he came straight to the cafe. I saw him and talked to him. He left the cafe alive and well about an hour later. I heard him leave the village in his boat. More important, Raphael was with me in the cafe when the soldier left. Yes, he was wearing his best clothes and he was very clean. But when Raphael came into the cafe, the soldier was sitting there alive, I promise you." "Perhaps he followed the soldier in his boat when he left that night. Perhaps he killed him on the sea later," said Rosa. "Clara didn't remember the time exactly." "Impossible," said my uncle. "Raphael stayed in the cafe with me and a lot of other men. He was dancing to the music. He didn't leave the cafe for about 2 hours. And Raphael couldn't catch the soldier's boat. It had an engine. It was a very fast boat." "He killed someone," said Rosa, "and he thought it was the soldier. I don't know who he killed, but that's what his good mother told me. I must believe her. Perhaps Raphael thought he killed the soldier. Then later he saw him in the cafe and went mad. It was still a terrible crime. Perhaps that's why he went crazy. But who did he kill? No, it's impossible. Rosa ran into the house crying. My uncle and I looked at the empty blue sea. We didn't speak for a long time. There was food on the table, but we didn't feel very hungry. Is it possible? I asked at last. What? That Raphael killed somebody by mistake? No, it's not possible. But his mother's story? Listen, said my uncle. I'm not stupid. When Raphael came into the cafe, he saw the soldier. He didn't look surprised. He didn't even look angry. They both listened to the music for about an hour. Raphael was happy. He was smiling and dancing. All right, I said. I believe you. I believe everybody. But this mystery is going to make me crazy soon.